Good morning, Cheryl.
Hello, good morning.
How are you this morning?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good, good.
Everything.
You are in London. I'm in Yorkshire in Shipley, and it's a nice Sunday morning. Thank you for agreeing to have this remote interview using Zoom. And the reason why we decided to have this interview is because you have been a sponsor of the APSL scholarship scheme from the day one when we launched it in October 2014. And you have been a loyal friend and constant companion supporting the scheme, not only with money, but with a lot of emotional goodwill, wise advice, and always caring to find out what is going on. You show real passion that motivates us and want us to keep going, and the scholarship has grown thanks to people like you and a number of other good people who have been very generous and trusting their money in our hands to help children. So together we have grown. And the purpose of this interview is that we started a series not so long ago to talk to sponsors like you, people who have chosen to name their bursary after somebody important to them. Now, in your case, from the day one, you decided to name your bursary as Sister Adrian Horan Memorial Bursary. Okay. Now, that is a name that intrigues. A few people here have even asked me who this lady is, why her name is used. So rather than me trying to explain, I thought the best way would be to get it directly from you and record it so it's available for anybody who likes to know a little bit about Sister Adrian Horan and why her name started appearing in the scholarship scheme. We'll come on to that. Before that, what we like to do is to go back a little bit into your own childhood and get a bit of an understanding about, understand you were born and brought up in Sri Lanka, and then you travel further afield, etc., etc. Now you are in London. So, and first of all about your childhood, then about your adulthood and your career, etc. And then we'll work our way down into becoming a donor and Adrian Horan. So over to you, Cheryl. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, your formative years, your education, etc. Over to you.
So my mother was a very young girl
Mm-hmm.
who, she was married at age 17. And when she had me, she was very young. She was still in her late teens.
Yeah.
And soon enough, she, didn't find life good with my father. So she divorced him.
Right.
And in the meantime, she's from Gaul, and she belongs to a rather, good family out there. So the Dahanaikas, the Gaul Dahanaikas, she's a relative of them, that lot. Yeah. And there was her cousin was Raja Dahanaika, who advised her to give me over to the convent nuns to look after, and I was only 3 years of age. Right. And the convent wasn't taking hostelers at that age. They were not taking children that young. Yeah. But this cousin of hers sort of insisted that because my mom was a young mom and inexperienced to look after me as a single mother, to put me in the convent and my brother Doran into St. Aloysius College, Gaul, into the hostel. And of course, I was kind of a pet to everybody around there. Yeah. But I had a happy childhood, and sort of in the convent I was well loved and well cared for until my mother married again a second time to a Sinhalese man called Vijita Nakkavita. But unfortunately, he was not a particularly nice person to his stepchildren. So Sister Adrian was always a lady, one of the nuns in the convent that looked out for me. And one of the things that happened to me was I was physically abused, beatings from my stepfather. And she insisted that my mother send me back into the convent to the hostel. Right. So I was in the convent until the age of 12, when I got 11 and a half, 12, when the Sri Lankan government offered scholarships for children called Jatika Navodaya Shishyatya. Yeah. And I was one of the recipients of that scholarship. So the Gaul convent had 2 children that passed the exam, the Jatika Navodaya Shishyatya, And I had the opportunity to go to Visakha Vidyalaya or to St. Paul's, Milagiriya. Visakha Vidyalaya didn't have an English medium, and Sister Adrian insisted that I should take the school that offered me English medium and not to go back to Sinhala medium, not to go into Sinhala medium, because I was studying in the Gaul convent in the English medium.
Right.
And one of the things she told my mom was that I should experience life. I would have a better chance in Colombo than I would have in the convent, that the convent would be it would be very secure for me, but I wouldn't experience a better education. I would experience a better education in Colombo, in St. Paul's, Milagiriya. Right. So I went back to Colombo, to St. Paul's, Milagiriya, and I went back home. But unfortunately, I had problems at home with my family, with my mother and stepfather. But she always kept in touch with me, Sister Adrian. So she wrote to me, and I would write to her, so that although I had left the convent, I hadn't left the care of Sister Adrian. She was always inquiring after me. And I did my O-levels. And unfortunately, just before my O-level examination, my older brother died. He died in an accident at Golface in Colombo. But again, that was my stepfather, asked my brother to leave home. Due to problems, he was not a particularly nice person, and he was just 16 and a half, 17, and he left home, and within a week he died. And I was extremely angry. I was a very angry girl at that time. And I was always looking after and doing the housework and things like that. But one day I just and Sister Adrian went off to Belgium, because she was sent to be the general counselor for the Sisters of Charity of Jesus and Mary in Belgium, in the Mother House. So I still kept in contact with her. But I left home, and I went to stay with a friend of mine in Colombo. She was a girl I went to school with, a girl called Husseina Hazari. I went to stay with her. And whilst I was staying there, I met one of the other nuns who said to me, "Oh, there's a Jesuit priest looking for English-speaking girls to send them to Italy." This was the year 1976. And going abroad was like going to heaven in a way, because it was such a, it was an opportunity that didn't come by everybody. It wasn't easy to go abroad. So I jumped at the idea of going abroad. And when I went to see Father Kiriati, he said to me, "I don't take children from the, young girls from the streets and send them to Italy. I only send good girls." And I very, vividly remember telling him, "I'm a little bit good and a little bit bad." And then he said, but then I said, "Sister Adrian," I told him that, to recommend myself, I said to her, "Oh, Sister Adrian knows me very well," So that was my sort of, recommendation, was that I knew Sister Adrian. And he just took me on, and he, sort of facilitated the fact that to go to Italy to work as a domestic for an industrialist. And whilst I was in Italy, and I had this opportunity now to I was abroad. I didn't want to go back to Sri Lanka, but I wanted to come to England because I wanted to educate myself. So anyway, Sister Adrian facilitated that I came to England and went to college in Bury. And there was a convent called Hollymount Convent in Bury, Tottington in Bury, Lancashire. And I stayed there, and I went to the Bury College of Further Education to get my A-levels. And I did get them. And I did get through, I did a course called residential care for, and did my A-levels. And I got into medical college in Manchester through the JMB to go into medicine. But unfortunately, the nuns then turned around and said to me that they couldn't afford to send me, they couldn't pay for my education, because they didn't have as much money.
Otherwise you would have done medicine.
So And then in conversation, somebody said, well, you can always still get a, work in a hospital as a nurse.
Yeah.
And they sort of put forward nursing as, you'll get your visa. You won't have any difficulty to get a visa for nursing, for nurse training. You'll get a place to stay, and you've got a profession. But then in the old days, it was called a vocation. Nursing was called a vocation rather than a profession.
Yeah.
But so my reason was I wanted to stay in England and not to return back to Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Although when I originally came, I told the immigration officer that I was coming to England only for just 1 year to get a certificate in some kind of childcare so that I could go back home. And I had a job for myself, in childcare.
Yeah.
Before I came to England, when I returned to my mother from the convent and I did my O-levels, as a means of earning a bit of money, I sort of had a preschool in Sri Lanka, in the village in Balagala, teaching children nursery, having a little nursery. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. But, as I said, the difficulties at home, I had problems and I left home. And the nursery closed down soon after because my mother couldn't take it through. So from there on was that interest I had in looking after children. And in the convent, in the boarding, we had, had the opportunities for dramas, for sing-alongs, for baila dancing, in the hostel. It was a happy place, it was a hostel for paying students. It was not an orphanage that I was in. So it was, the girls in the hostel were from, rich families, from tea planters.
Which hostel are you talking about? Sri Lanka?
Sacred Heart Convent, Gaul.
Gaul, okay, right.
Yeah, Sacred Heart Convent, Gaul. It was a private school then. Now it's been taken over by the government.
Okay.
But in the old days, it was on the same beliefs as, private schools in England.
Indeed,
hostel schools, boarding schools. So it was a boarding school for girls. And so I did my, got myself into, trained to do nursing at Queen Mary's Hospital for Children, Carshalton in Surrey. Unfortunately, the hospital is now shut down, but the name just carries on at St. Heliers, but it's still called Queen Mary's Hospital for Children.
Right.
And I did my training there. And soon after that, it was a bit difficult to get a work permit. So to get a work permit, I was asked, I went to the nursing officer and he said, the only way I can get a permit for you is if you work night duty and work with the old geriatric unit.
Right.
Because in the geriatric unit, nobody wants to work there. And then he has a reason to write to the Home Office to ask for a work permit for me was because there was no continuation of nursing care for the geriatric patients. So I took on the job to work just full-time night duty just to get a visa, to get a work permit. But thereafter that I I had a friend called, he was called Mr., he was Reggie Fernando, his wife. I knew her. She was an ex-nun. And then they told me how to get my permanent visa and how to get my, dual citizenship. And I was working. And then once I'd got my sort of my English citizenship, I then started training as a midwife.
Right.
So trained as a midwife, but I had to train as a midwife at Blackpool Victoria Hospital. I trained there as a midwife. And I met my husband long ago in 1976 when I had left home. And I was in Colombo. And as I said, I took him to see my mother's cousin, Uncle Rajadahanaika. And who really told me off and told my boyfriend off at the time, saying this is not the way Sri Lankan girls behave. And he told him off as well, saying that he shouldn't come to Sri Lanka and think he can take the girls out and then dump them. So after I'd come to England and I trained as a nurse and I was working as a neonatal intensive care unit nurse, he somehow managed to, send a letter to my mother, get my new address,
Yeah.
and come looking for me years later. And
In
then
the
we got
UK.
married and we have our children.
And he came to UK and met you.
Yes, but I've always, right throughout my life, there's always been somebody who's looked after me and
Yeah.
my interest. And that was the main person was Sister Adrian. So even if I got married,
Yeah.
it was not, when my husband wanted to marry me,
Yeah.
I asked him to get permission from Sister Adrian, not my mother.
Right. Right. So
I
she's
still
your
have the
surrogate mother
letter.
then. Yeah.
So that is how much I loved and respected her. So
Yeah.
even as a child, as I said, I wouldn't call it a delinquent, but I was very naughty in the hostel
Yeah.
because I was spoiled as a child
Yeah.
in the hostel. So everything that I was not supposed to do, I would do.
Yeah. Because you were young, you were getting away with all sorts.
I did get away with things. And the native nuns would send me to Sister Adrian's office. She was the school principal for over 25 years for
Yeah.
Sacred Heart Convent.
Yeah.
And they would send me to her.
Yeah.
She would be reprimanded or punished.
Yeah.
But she would never reprimand me. The first question will be, why did you do it?
Yeah.
And I would have to explain to her why.
Yeah.
And then she always told me behavior has a reason. So understand the reason.
Yeah.
So if a child represents themselves as naughty, awkward, sometimes being bullies, it's always to ask them why and always find their side of the story. And she always took that time for me.
Yeah.
And she, like I remember once a teacher complaining to her in tears that I had been very rude and nasty to her.
Yeah.
But it was because she told me about my mother being, divorcing and getting married again. And that is why I was in the convent. And that made me very angry.
Yeah.
So I was extremely rude to her. So she went to Sister Adrian and told her that I was rude to her.
Yeah.
So before she asked me why, she asked the teacher, why do you think Cheryl was rude to you?
Yeah.
And she wouldn't say what wrong she did. So then she asked me, Cheryl, why were you rude to Miss Beryl?
Yeah.
And I said, oh, because she told me that my mother was a divorced woman and married again and all these things. And, and she said it in front of the other children and they made me feel bad,
Yeah.
And then she turned around to the teacher and she said, now you know the reason why Cheryl was rude to you.
Yeah.
So therefore that sense of justice, of always being fair, so not sort of taking a side either way, but she was always fair and always asking children. And she was one lady that knew every child's name. Being the school principal, she knew every single child's name. There was not a single child that she would go and ask them, what is your name?
Yeah.
She would address them by name.
Yeah.
So, and that was I felt that for her to remember every child's name was so good. So you couldn't make up a name and tell her so and so did this or did that. She knew exactly who you were talking about.
Yeah.
And that influence. And then when I myself got married and I wanted my children to have an English education, I just couldn't afford it in Japan, because in Japan, education in English was extremely expensive, because we had 4 children.
Yeah.
But there was a lady called Mrs. Leonhardt, Anna Maria Leonhardt.
Yeah.
And her and her husband helped me to get my children into international schools.
Yeah.
Not free of charge, but at a very reduced rate.
In Japan.
In Japan.
Yeah.
And whenever I thanked this lady, she always says, don't thank me, just pass it on. And that was something she always said, pass it on.
Right.
So when my children sort of did well in school, and then, as I said, making me getting into Oxford was a dream come true that was sort of beyond expectations.
Yeah.
It was always remembering that it was something, it was a gift, it was a blessing, that it had to be passed on.
Yeah.
So I think that those are the 2 people that sort of motivate me to always find children that need education, children that are bright and wanting to study.
Yeah.
To help them.
Yeah.
And different children have different problems. It's
Yeah.
always taking the time to find out
Yeah.
what is their problem and what they need. They may appear, so there will be kids where parents have a lot of money, but the parents might not. I have met them
Yeah.
where, parents have a lot of money,
Yeah.
but they would not send the children to private school
Yeah.
or facilitate, a child's need of whatever it is they want to, pursue, like music or art or something like that,
Yeah.
because they'll say, oh, it's expensive and it's not, um, not useful. And mothers in Sri Lanka, I know lots of mothers who send their children to state schools where
Yeah.
they can easily afford to send them to a private school, if not international, but they wouldn't.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I believe in education in England,
Yeah.
in English,
Yeah.
because educating a child in English opens the whole world to them.
Yeah.
In many shapes and forms,
Yeah.
So that is why I would like to, pursue it. So as I say, as you know, I have this little preschool in the village,
Indeed.
and my intention is to, facilitate poor children, to educate them, to give them a start,
Yeah.
a good start, to arouse their curiosity.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've found at the moment, it's extremely difficult to find English educated people locally.
Yeah.
Because anybody who is educated in English
Yeah.
has left the country or is in high post, and preschool education is kind of not sort of taken very seriously.
Right. Right.
But
So,
in Sri Lanka, I think we really need to sort of get the preschool education sorted out well, knowing exactly, because parents want the children to be taught academia,
yeah.
to be academically able to do things, but they forget that the child needs time to be a child.
Yeah.
The child needs that time to, enjoy their childhood.
Yeah.
So the preschools are sort of insisting on the children being taught the alphabet and their sums and things like that, more than other things that I believe is more important at the age of 3.
Yeah. So in a way, just listening to you there, Cheryl, a couple of thoughts going through my mind. I think Sister Adrian and that very young experience from the age of 3 gave you the chance to be a child. That made a huge difference in your life, and that's quite important to you. You always value that, and where possible, giving the children to be children to enjoy their childhood. I'm also picking up maybe from a previous conversation we had, and you're living in Japan. I think Japan seems to have add a lot of value to that part of the childhood.
Yes.
Therefore, whatever work you do, whether scholarships or your nursery preschool place in Balagala, you are quite passionate about giving that children that curiosity, the childhood.
Yeah.
Just go into that a little bit more, because that's quite interesting.
Because if you give a child the opportunity to be curious, the child will learn, their curiosity will make them want to find out more.
Yeah.
And in wanting to find out more, they will ask questions, and they will, seek what they want to find.
Yeah.
So whatever their interest is.
Yeah.
So, for example, in my preschool, one of the things that I give them some kind of, when I say I won't say I feed them as a food, but I give them that opportunity to sit at table and to learn manners, how to share.
Yeah.
So they sit around, and then when they sit around, we have a thing called circle time.
Yeah.
The circle time is when they have time to discuss things or talk about things. So they can bring a toy or something from home and talk about it.
Yeah.
Or talk about themselves or their family, so that it gives them the opportunity to express themselves of what what is around them.
Yeah.
So that is the circle time, I feel, is very important. Another thing, I love dancing. So I've made sure that the teacher gives the children twice a week free dancing time, where the children just have music and they just free dancing. It's called free dancing. Nothing to, no no sort of way. They express themselves in their own way.
Just let it loose.
The music is on and they dance. So
Yeah.
it's free dancing so that they enjoy themselves.
Yeah.
And we have these little things where I trying to teach them how to share.
Yeah.
That whatever you have, you can
Yeah.
share.
Yeah.
And in sharing, you receive more, but
Yeah.
you have to share first to know, to experience the receiving more.
Yeah.
Because, and as I said, like my children, both children have done very well educationally, but it's in strange ways, because when Megumi came, she was not entitled to go into Oxford because she did her secondary education in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
So she hadn't been in the UK for 3 years to be able to go to university. Although she got a place, she wasn't able to go in directly. And she was so upset because she had to be in the country for 3 years before. But by that time, university would be sort of not somewhere she would want to go, waiting 3 years if she went into employment. But I got the brainwave to write to Sir Patterson, who was the Chancellor of Oxford University.
Right.
And said, it is a sad story when your child gets into Oxford, but you don't have the money to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I explained to him that I'd educated the children in Japan and in Sri Lanka because I wanted them to know what my mother country was.
Yeah.
And it is sad that I've worked in the NHS, but I'm only, only a nurse, and I don't have this money to send her to as an international student to Oxford.
Yeah.
And I didn't even expect a reply, but lo and behold, I got a reply saying that she could go into Oxford the next year as a native student.
Wow.
So it's, it's those, the unexpected happening. And then as my younger daughter, she's not the one who likes academia very much. I had to push her into going into university, but then now to do her master's in teaching.
Yeah.
I mean, she applied and she got a couple of universities, but as a joke, she applied for UCL. And it was a joke that she would, get a place, but lo and behold, she got into UCL and she's just graduated at her master's degree there.
Yeah.
So it's just those opportunities. And I feel it is that the more you give, the more, I said, the more you give, the more you get, but you have to give first to receive. So, so educating children, it's not you're expecting, but it does, bounce back to you one way or the other. And I firmly believe in that.
Well, that's a very strong message. I think you have sort of demonstrated with practical examples, something you have been saying, give and you shall receive.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you least expect it. But
well, I mean, my daughter, she didn't even want to go for the interview to UCL.
Yeah.
But she said she had nothing to lose because she'd already got Greenwich.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she went to, and she was the last person to be interviewed for the school. And she was even more surprised when she got it. And the whole family couldn't believe she got into UCL.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. And I firmly believe that if you educate a child, I mean, in Sri Lanka, in our Buddhist way, we believe in giving alms givings.
Yeah.
So, but I always believe that, yes, you can feed a hungry person for the day.
Yeah.
You'll feed the hungry person again the next day.
Yeah.
And again, but after about the third or the fourth day, the person expects you to feed them.
Yeah.
Okay, so you take away that ability for the person to find how to feed himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Become dependent
on you. So therefore you take in that respect away from the person, because the person is expecting you to feed them.
Yeah.
And you also sometimes think, but why can't you feed yourself? Why can't you do this, or why can't you do that?
Yeah.
But with a child, and you educate in the child, you give that child a whole, you increase that child's potential in life.
Yeah.
For the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Because as I said, when you teach children, young children, to be curious, and you teach them things like sharing and caring and kindness and all the rest of it, in that, instead of that academia, you've actually created a child
Yeah.
that will be very, very useful to society.
Yeah.
In more ways than one. So
Yeah.
that is why I do sort of, I would give money to contribute for, a dane, but
Yeah.
I would do it more for a child rather
Yeah.
than for adults.
Yeah. For the reasons you explained.
Yes.
Yeah. Because we
So
long-term investment.
it's a long-term investment, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you educate one child in the family, that child will help the rest of the family.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Cheryl, you took us through quite an interesting tour from your childhood to your adulthood, studying, um, getting married, doing nursing, having children, children's all education, and your husband coming looking for you, and your surrogate mother, Sister Adrian. Quite
Yes.
interesting. Through that, also quite a few things you believe in, the sense of justice that you admire about Sister Adrian. And she taking the trouble to remember all the children's names so they couldn't fool her. And she was always keen to find out why children said or did something they did, trying to understand
That
the
was
why.
very important for a child
Yeah,
as a child,
yeah,
so that the
yeah,
child felt there was an adult listening to them,
yeah,
accepting how they felt or how they viewed the situation. That is very important for a child.
yeah, yeah. And then you also mentioned something about the children at this preschool place in Balagala. You call it the circle time, and time
Yes.
to sit round and giving the opportunity for them to speak.
Yes.
And somebody listens to them, the importance of
That is very important.
And then the free time for them to let rip and dance whichever they like, because that is that freedom.
Yes.
And through it came through that you value the education, not giving a man a fish, but teaching a man to fish, so they are independent
Yes, that
for
was
life.
my mother's favorite phrase.
Yeah, yeah.
Malu, allavu malu dendepa malu allandu gannanna.
Yeah, yeah. And then you also asserted the importance of English education, which opened the doors for you, which you are passionate about giving to other children.
Yes.
It's a very, very interesting, very powerful story coming through. Now, right, is there anything on that you want to add? Because I want to move on to talk a little bit more, ask you a few more things about Sister Adrian.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. Right, you said she was the principal of Holy Cross. Is it Holy Cross?
No. Sacred Heart Convent.
Sacred Heart Convent,
Gaul.
Yeah. And she, I believe she's of Irish origin, if it is correct.
That's right. She was of Irish origin.
Yeah.
And she came to Sri Lanka in a ship, not in an aeroplane.
A long time ago.
Yes.
Yeah. They were the people who came to give their life, not to go back, and they dug in and stayed there to complete the job. And she must have been highly respected. Quite a bit
she was.
Yeah.
She was.
Legend, because I have come across a couple of people like that. When I studied in India, there was a priest, a Jesuit priest, who had been the principal of the leading college for 40 years. He was an institution. Yes. Anybody in that area of any achievement was an old boy, and they would stand up, by mentioning his name. He was that sort of a legend. So I believe this nun must have been a character like that, both loved and feared. And then you said eventually she moved to Belgium to be part of their international.
Yeah, she was the general counselor for the Sisters of Charity of Jesus and Mary.
Right. Did she come back to Sri Lanka?
Oh, yes. She came back to Sri Lanka when she retired from the post of being the counselor. She came back, and then at the age of 70 or 75, the community, the community she was in, they gave her the option to go back home to Ireland to retire, to spend her last days.
Yeah.
She took the opportunity to go there, but she told her niece, who was her next of kin, as it were, that she wanted to die in Sri Lanka, and that she wanted to be buried in Gaul at Dadalla. And she died in Sri Lanka. And she was buried in Dadalla. And I was the last person to be with her when she was alive.
Brilliant.
That was the greatest honor I had was I was nursing her in the convent.
Yeah.
And I was the person who was in the room with her when she finally died.
Right. That's quite moving, because you called her your surrogate mother.
Yes.
And you were there.
She made my children call her Suduachi.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
White grandma. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were like the daughter. You were.
I was, yes.
Yeah. Brilliant. Now that tells the story that actually, to me, I can fully understand why this lady was so important to you and how she influenced your life, and perhaps what she did to you is carried forward in what you do to other people.
Yes.
Yeah, quite impressive. So because of that, you are determined with whatever you do, her name is remembered.
Always.
Yeah, and when you said the very first day when you got that check out and left with me I want to sponsor some children, and it will be in memory of Sister Horan. Now I know Adrian Horan, who she is.
Sister Adrian Doran.
Adrian Doran, yeah.
D-O-R-A-N, Doran.
Oh, right. So I'll get the spelling right, Doran, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right, that's being very, very good, Cheryl. That's very, very inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you ever so much for sharing the story with us.